The U.S. jobs report for September showed COVID continues to disrupt the labor market.
Rising costs from gasoline to groceries to rent, prices, they're just soaring. Inflation is rising at its fastest rate in 40 years.
My name is Jason Krzyzewski. I am from Denver, Colorado. And before this COVID-19 began, I was a biomedical designer, and 2 weeks ago today I was let go of my position.
My name is Adrian Trujillo. I am from Seattle, Washington. It sucks to lose a job. You know, I have bills and stuff, so that was a concern. Of course, that was immediate. My God, I don't have a job.
5 years in the hospitality industry, so hotels, an event planner. So when all this mess went down, like late March, we were furloughed.
Credit card payments, loan payments are all late. You obviously amass many late fees with those. If this goes on for another month or two, I mean, how am I supposed to, really recover from that?
I've never experienced anything like this. I lived through 9/11 within the hotel industry, and we did pretty well recovering, but I'm very nervous about this one.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining me tonight on Real Talk with Jean Price. We have a great show in store for you. One that is so thought-provoking, it really makes you want to reassess what you think about the state of the economy today. But before we get started on our show, I want to take this time on behalf of my team and I and thank you for those that showed up at the major event that we had at Neiman Marcus. It was such a great success. The honorees were totally in awe, and we're just so grateful for your support. And every time you show up, it always makes us glad. And again, thank you for joining us all the time on Real Talk with Jean Price, which is every Wednesday at 6:30. But now we want to get into our show. This has been probably one of the toughest topics to face, to talk about. It's a reality that's hard to deal with. And I would dare say that it was probably even before COVID, but I think we all can agree that because of COVID and after COVID, the state of this world has totally changed. I mean, think about gas prices. You go to the gas station and you're spending money like never before. So tonight we're going to engage in this conversation. I want you to grab everybody you could think of. I have an expert advisor that's actually going to come on, and he's going to help us dialogue and dissect the state of the economy and what we're facing today. So I want to take this time to welcome my guests tonight. I want to welcome Jamal Tolles to Real Talk with Jean Price. Welcome, sir.
Thank you so much for inviting me to the show. Glad to be here again with you.
Absolutely. Again, thank you so much on behalf of my team and I. As I was saying in the intro, I'm excited about this conversation, mostly because of your expertise and how we could kind of drill down and kind of peel it apart, because I think you can agree with me that what we're facing is kind of tough, for a lot of people. And as we talked a little about backstage, I was talking to my mom today, who's 80. She's a senior, and she's deciding whether or not she should go out and drive because she can't afford gas. But before we get started, Jamal, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, just so you guys know, I'm a pastor at the Excelling Church. Been there for years, executive pastor, moving on into my own ministry. And I've been in the financial markets now going back to 2003. Started out as a banker who just wanted to get licensed and learn more about the stock market because I've always had a passion for it. But after a while, I started to just see myself in a place where I didn't see so many of my own people there, from a client standpoint, from a coworker standpoint. And I wanted to put myself in a position so that I could be a gatekeeper and a door opener for people who look like me. Yeah. And so that I could have these realistic conversations with people who are just who look like me, but may not have a desire to want to work in finance or know about finance or even care about it, but just to be able to have thought-provoking conversations so that they can gain wealth too and not just be spenders.
That's awesome, Jamal, because you said a couple of things that really just perked my interest. First of all, I just want to go back for a second. How do you think COVID has impacted in what we're dealing with now in 2022?
COVID has impacted. Well, we have different phases of how this looks. In the beginning, things were a little bit shaky, but we started over the years, year one, year two of COVID, to start to get incentives and credits from the government to be able to stimulate households.
Right.
And the problem is when you can't keep that energy and you can't keep doing that, stimulating or sending that money to people, there's a deficit now. Those households don't have it. People get comfortable with that financial money that's coming in on top of whatever they're receiving. So it's just the we're in a place of uncertainty, but there's definitely things that you can do to keep your household on track.
Do you think that, what's going on with Ukraine has impacted the gas of, what we're facing? We kind of alluded to how high the prices are today. And I think I said, if you're driving in my car, I have to put 91 or 93. So you can imagine, what I'm spending, or maybe yourself. Do you think that has any bearing on what's going on?
Absolutely. It has a direct effect on what gas prices are right now. There's an open market for people who purchase gas, meaning gas stations, companies, and stuff like that. And typically, gas has been under $100 a barrel, or crude oil has been under $100 a barrel. But with the Ukraine-Russia conflict that's happening right now, many of the companies and the countries are standing with NATO and not purchasing oil that comes from Russia, because there are major pipelines that fed the United States and European Union that we were purchasing gas prior to this conflict. With us not being able to purchase that gas and having that influx, it's putting pressure on the places that we weren't getting gas from before. So now prices are now well over $100. We're talking about $110 per gallon. And we haven't seen that since 2006, 2007, when we had the other financial crisis.
Yes, I remember that.
And we saw gas around $5 a gallon, and it was hitting somewhere around $110, $115 a gallon around that time.
Wow. So from what I understand, inflation is currently at a 40-year high.
Yeah.
How has this inflation affected us?
It's affected us in so many ways. So it's one, affected our purchasing power. So inflation has a direct effect on how much the value of your money costs. So at one point, a pack of gum might have been 25 cents for a 5-stick. That same pack of gum is now about 45 or 50 cents for the same pack of gum. You're not getting anything more, but you're paying more for it because the value of money has gone down. Also, with the inflation of the stimulus and there being more disposable money at that time, people were buying more. And when you were buying more and able to consume more into your household, that also puts a stress on the demand of supply. And when there's less to go around, prices go up.
I was listening to the news the other day, Jamal, and the interest rates on buying a home are going up. I was so surprised. I'll be honest. My husband and I were driving and we heard it on the radio in the car, and I'm going, how are the interest rates going up on houses? So all of this is being impacted. How do people afford to buy homes? I mean, I guess people still can, but that means the prices of homes have to be going up.
Yeah. Home prices since the beginning of the pandemic have skyrocketed. The interest rates on how we can purchase a home through the bank is a separate issue from the actual just prices of houses just going up. Anyone who lives in New York, and if you live in Long Island, you've seen your home value almost double in the last 2 years. And that's just because people want to leave New York City. So that puts a demand on the market. And when supply and demand once again there's more people who want to buy than there are willing to sell, the value goes up. Now, interest rates, that's when you go to the bank and you fill out your loan application, and that says to the bank says, we're going to lend you the money for this house, but your interest rate is now going to be 5%. So where your mortgage would at one point at the beginning of the pandemic, we were around like 3%, 3.8%.
Exactly.
Your mortgage might have been around 2,100. Now with the 5%, we're looking at 2,300, 2,400. So you're talking about a couple $100 more that you're going to pay out of pocket each month, and that adds up over time.
It does, and it really can impact a family, especially if you're living on a budget and things are the way they are. Some people live in paycheck to paycheck. I want to go back to something, Jamal, that you said earlier. I want to talk about the culture of how we think. Because you said you were talking, you kind of alluded to kind of where I want to go about spending. From a culture perspective, why is it that we spend rather than save?
It's just the dynamic of how we operate, how we were taught. The average middle class family spends 98% of the income that they have coming in. Families that are poor or considered to be poor spend 100%, whereas the wealthiest Americans in the United States only spend 30% of the income that comes into their households.
But why is that?
Why? Because they've been given a running start. They have the education and the understanding around finance. And typically in those households, they're producers. They're not just consumers. So they understand the value of money. They understand the value of what it takes to run a business. Businesses have been passed down, houses have been passed down. So, it's kind of like a 400-year head start versus people who are acquiring that knowledge now and trying to sustain. All we can do now is bridge the gap with financial literacy.
I like what you said, because they are producers and not consumers. That's powerful.
Yeah.
And that's powerful. And you're right. They have been given a head start. So if we're trying to catch up, if they already have a head start, right, and we're trying to catch up, what's the process in catching up? Can you give a couple of principles to that?
Yeah. The very first thing I would say is understanding the dynamics of your household and what you can and cannot do. It would be nice to keep up with the Jones, but I don't have the Jones bank account. I don't know what they're actually making on paper versus what they're telling me. And trying to keep up with someone to have a facade, we really have to just be transparent of what we can and cannot do in this season, and look at our finances from a standpoint of how much are we actually saving, what are we actually spending, and what is not essential in this season.
Interesting. To me,
I personally did this myself. I took a look at my own bank account, and with the kids, we have like Netflix, we have Disney Plus, and just the little things they tell you, Dad, I want this, Dad, I want that, and you don't even think about it, but all of these things add up. So now I had to pull them in and reel them in. I'm like, all right, so which of these are you actually using right now? Because I'm not going to continue to pay for all of these services.
Yes.
Just having those realistic conversations with your loved ones. And if it's just you, having a realistic conversation with yourself to really break down your finances to see what you're spending.
Yeah. I love the fact that you talked about keeping up with the Joneses, because I think from my perspective, as a pastor and, having, we deal with people all the time in church, and not just in church, but just people. People are wired to keep it with the Joneses. Case in point, people say, well, when I get my income tax, I shouldn't say nobody, people don't think about saving. They think about spending. When I get my income tax, why is that a slogan? I didn't come up like that. I don't know why that's a slogan. When I get my income tax, boom. Why is that a slogan in our culture?
I think it's a slogan because we put too much stock in the fact that other things are not going to come up in life. So we're thinking about, if I already have my money coming in, this additional money is just for me to play with. This additional money is like a reward, when it's really not. It's really you just getting your own money back.
Exactly.
And, we really have to start making sound investments with it, especially when the average person in America cannot afford a $300 emergency.
Yeah, that's true. I was having a conversation, Jamal, the other day with my husband, and we were talking to one of my daughters, and we were just talking about money. It's interesting that we're talking about this tonight. The average person can't go to somebody and say, look, I need $500. Could you give it to me? And that really that's bothersome because the world is so geared toward entrepreneurship. And we were kind of talking with the team before we came on the show. It's great to be an entrepreneur. We're entrepreneurs. But it's a lot that goes to being an entrepreneur. It's not just because you don't want to clock in or have somebody tell you what to do. Can you kind of talk a little bit to the pros and or the cons to entrepreneurship? Because it's a lot to being an entrepreneur. You have to be able to handle it, especially financially.
Absolutely. There's a lot of pros to being an entrepreneur. Of course, for many entrepreneurs, you're able to work in a time frame that's comfortable for you. You're able to produce your products and you're able to sell them. I would say time management is a factor as well. Working for a company, having a 9 to 5, you have set hours.
Yes.
When you're an entrepreneur, the clock doesn't stop. There's no set income coming in. You have to be able to manage and balance it. Being a financial advisor, I remember when I got my first really big check from a major client doing some investments for them. Some of the senior guys on Wall Street told me, Jamal, save that check, because we have ebbs and flows in the business. So just because you're getting this money now doesn't mean it's going to be consistently coming in, especially when you have a client-based business where people are coming in to set appointments with you. You have to, if you don't have the business coming in, you have to stretch your money. I would also say that, a con to entrepreneurship is starting a business and becoming an entrepreneur doesn't necessarily make you a great business owner. That just means that you have a product to sell. And, we can talk about the pros and cons of dealing with different people and how they operate their business. But I think it's just, professionalism, follow up, all of the different things that you're required to do as an entrepreneur, where there's no other layers to make sure that stuff gets done. There's no other checks and balances to make sure that your professionalism is high. So if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you definitely need a mentor. You definitely need a coach, someone to walk you through it, and making sure you're doing your business the right way.
Yeah.
Having a product to sell does not necessarily, having a product to sell and then legally having the right to sell it are two different things.
Right.
So
yeah. Can you touch on that a little bit, if you don't mind, Jamal? Because that's an important point, even from the perspective of a church. Now, we run our church like a business.
Yeah.
501c3, we payroll is through a payroll processing company. We literally run it as if it's a business. I don't know if everybody sees church as a business. I get the preaching side, but then there's the business side. Can you kind of just talk about that a little bit? Because that's a very important point that you brought up.
Absolutely. When it comes to ministries and churches, there is absolutely a business component to how we operate the business. The church, there has to be a business model. And, we definitely want to make sure that one, you said that you guys are using a payroll service. That's the smartest thing that you can do. Especially as a pastor, we like to think that there's a lot of things that we could do. But when we break down the time and the hours in the day that we have to actually get things done, you'd be better off saving your money and paying a professional who has the dedicated time to get it done than trying to do it yourself.
Yeah.
And the government doesn't care that you tried to wing it on your own and you did this wrong. I see it a lot. You definitely want to make sure that you have your business affairs in order. Faith is one thing, but faith in process is another.
Right.
Faith says I can go through the process of legally legitimizing my business, my church, and making sure that I'm handling all of the things properly. If you pay your employees, but then you don't take taxes out as a 501c3 or not, these are just the things that happen. But if you don't know, and what you don't know can hurt you.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, Jamal. We went through a small situation in our service where we hired some singers, background singers, so forth. And we explained to them right out the gate, listen, in our church, we run our payroll through ADP. You have to get taxes taken out. And I get it. People feel, they don't have to get taxed, these musicians and singers. And I hope I'm not stepping on somebody's toes, but I'm just saying what we do. And we explained to them New York State law requires
Yeah,
that we follow the law. First of all, that is a great godly principle out the gate, that you follow
absolutely.
the rules and the laws. And I have to say to you that we went through a little controversy trying to get people, these particular people, to understand that even as a church, a ministry, we have to follow what the law requires for New York State. And I'm glad you kind of touched on that a little bit. I want to go a little further and talk about I want to get your perspective on debt and then
Mhm.
credit. Because I think sometimes people feel that they can run up their debt by using credit. Either way, that's debt if you don't pay the credit. So can you talk
Absolutely.
about that a little bit?
Yeah. So, credit cards themselves, they are credit, they are debt. Just like a loan, it's a different type of credit. It's a revolving line. So a credit card, you pay it off and you spend it back. The loan, you take the money and then you start making payments on it in 30 days. So that's the difference.
Mhm.
The credit cards do have their advantages. You can get cash back on many of them. Even as a business owner, they can make a smart business sense. But the goal is that with the additional purchasing power, you
Mhm.
have to have the ability to pay it back. Um, and I think sometimes we don't think about that in the long run because we get the short gain of getting what we want in our house or in
Yeah.
our building or in our business. And I
Mhm.
had to even put myself on that same type of regiment in my house before I buy something for me that I consider fun or a toy or whatever it is. I say to myself, I give myself 30 days. And if I have the same feeling about it that I had 30 days ago, then I might go out there and buy it. But
Oh,
I'm not going to allow the impulse of
mm,
the situation to put me in a position and now regret making the purchase later on because I'm financially frustrated.
got it. Wow. So would you say then, sir, that when people do that, they're being led by their emotions?
Most of the time,
Yeah.
as a person who's been in finance and been in sales this entire time, because finance and sales are hand to hand,
Yes, they are.
we play on the emotion of the moment the entire time. That's how you can walk out of a dealership with a 15% interest on a car that you don't have the income to pay for,
Yeah.
because the emotion of feeling like you need this car or you want it in the moment goes beyond your emotions of the reality of your situation.
Right, right, absolutely. Well, we're going to take a commercial break to my viewing audience. This is so good, so informative, and I love conversations like this because my husband is a staunch entrepreneur. He has a great business mind. So I love talking about the pros, the cons, the ins, the outs. We're going to come back with Jamal and talk about this a little more. We're talking about the state of the economy. We'll be right back.
All right.
The U.S. jobs report for September showed COVID continues to disrupt the labor market.
Rising costs from gasoline to groceries to rent, prices, they're just soaring. Inflation is rising at its fastest rate in 40 years.
My name is Jason Krzyzewski. I am from Denver, Colorado. And before this COVID-19 began, I was a biomedical designer. And 2 weeks ago today, I was let go of my position.
My name is Adrian Trujillo. I am from Seattle, Washington. It sucks to lose a job. I have bills and stuff. So that was a concern. Of course, that was immediate. My God, I don't have a job.
5 years in the hospitality industry, so hotels, an event planner. So when all this mess went down, like late March, we were furloughed.
Credit card payments, loan payments are all late. You obviously amass many late fees with those. If this goes on for another month or two, I mean, how am I supposed to, really recover from that?
I've never experienced anything like this. I lived through 9/11 within the hotel industry, and we did pretty well recovering, but I'm very nervous about this one.
Welcome back to Real Talk with Gene Price. We've been having such a great conversation with Jamal Toll, and we've been talking about the state of the economy, what we're facing from entrepreneurship to credit to debt to interest rates to the housing market to inflation to Ukraine. We've been talking about a whole host of things, and it's a great conversation. We want you to tune in. We want you to stay with us for the remaining of the show because I really feel you're going to get something out of it. I want to welcome back my guest tonight, Jamal. Please come back to Real Talk with Gene Price.
Glad to be back.
Oh, this has just been so great. This like gets my brain matter going. Before we went to commercial break, as you know, we've been talking about a whole host of things. I kind of want to just pivot just a little bit and kind of what your thoughts are from a mental perspective on a couple of things. What's your take on the fact that those that are still working from home, how do you feel that affects the economy? Because there's some of us like myself, I'm still remote working.
Yeah. It affects the economy in several ways. So first things first, from a business standpoint, it makes sense for large corporations. There's a lot of savings in that. They're not paying rent for buildings. You know, most businesses, especially the larger corporations, don't like to buy spaces. They like to rent them because, you know, the maintenance of those buildings is now on the owners. So without having those physical locations, you know, you're in your house, you're consuming your own electricity, all of these different things. It just works out in the favor of the business owner. So that in itself, the con to it is that we can have more consumerism on our side as individuals, because everything in your house is going up. You are using more electricity in your home now, so you're eating more food from home. And, you know, there are pros to this stuff too. So, you know, at least you can cook your own stuff. And, you know, it's just really just making sure that you have a healthy balance and you're resilient in the midst of it all.
Right. That's an excellent point. Because I don't like to call things the new normal per se, because I think when things are off kilter or not aligned, I don't see how there's any kind of normalcy to it. So I don't like to say the new normal, but in the term of just saying it in the world today, with this new normal, right? How do you feel that we're going to fare with the upcoming, like we have the fall that's getting ready to come. So many things are going to be coming up in the fall. As far as you mentioned, the housing market is changing. All prices are changing. Do you think we're going to fare okay from your perspective?
I think the people who are working at home will have some advantages. Of course, if you're not out and you're not regularly out on a regular basis, COVID hasn't gone anywhere. So if you're staying at home, you're kind of safe with that. Even though I know with my company, a lot of us were working at home, but now, with lifts in COVID and new information, a lot of us are being called to come back into the office or back to travel. So we're seeing those things start to open back up. For people who are at home, my biggest thing I would just say to them is make sure that you have the ability to disconnect, because right now what we see is that it's hard for people to disconnect when they're at home because they feel like they're not doing as much because the travel time and all of those things that they used to do, you're factoring that out, and you can literally just roll out of bed and start working.
Right.
So if you're on salary, and you're not getting like an hourly wage, you could be working too many hours. So just making sure that you have a healthy balance of working and making sure that you're getting your work done in the appropriate time.
Yeah, that's good. As you're talking to, I'm thinking about the next generation that's coming behind us. How do we prepare them for wealth, for knowledge, for financial freedom? How do we prepare?
I think it's important to make sure that they're in the room for those types of conversations.
Okay.
I know with the older generations and even in my own family, a lot of times when my parents were handling business and things like that, I wasn't in the room to get an understanding of that.
Mhm.
But just being able to take your son, your daughter to the bank so they can learn about bank accounts, and making sure you're putting them in a position to understand finance early. Don't leave it on school. Make
Right.
sure that you have the information and you're able to trickle it down to your children in a way that they can understand. Of course, there's apps out there that you can teach them, but are some basics that we have to be able to teach our children as well.
Yeah, And I'm glad you brought that up. And the reason I was asking that question is because we do rely, well, I have grandchildren, but parents do rely on the schools to feed their children with for everything. And we've lost the essence of family and, just being together and talking. Like my husband is a stickler with my grandchildren. You come to the table, leave your cell phone someplace else, because now the dialogue can begin again to what you're saying, talking about being an entrepreneur, talking about finances. And the reason I'm bringing that up too is, do you feel that we should be pushing our children for college, or in your opinion, or do you feel that learning things about how can I say this, plumbing and electrical, like all things like that? And let me tell you why I'm asking. Let me go back around. We are finding that kids going to college, that a lot of them are not liking college. And I don't know why, but then there's trades, but people don't talk about a lot of trades. What do you think of that from a financial perspective?
I think that the issue is that people can't speak about something that they don't know about. Most people haven't. They may not have a trade. They don't know anyone who's a plumber, who went through the apprentice process and the years it took to become a plumber or a carpenter or a mechanic. Higher education, whether it's college or trade school, I think is essential because the goal is to be a professional in whatever we're doing. So I think the idea of college still needs to be a conversation, because there's just certain things you can't cheat your way through. You can't faith your way through. You can't, open up a clinic today and say you're a doctor, but you didn't go to school for it. So, the key is really just, and there was an article that was done on Forbes about minorities not putting themselves, when they go to college, in fields or careers that would pay them the most money.
Really?
So,
And did it say why? I mean, what was their take on it? That's interesting. What was the take on that article?
it talked about the pressure of being successful coming out of a group of people that may not have been. Like if you're the first person in your family, you might not know what to you don't have a tour guide in the process.
Right,
Your,
right.
your parents are travel agents. They send you to the destination and say, go to school, learn,
Mhm.
but they can't guide you through the process because they haven't done it themselves.
Right.
So I think it's just really just, so, and one of the examples in the articles was is that the average child who comes from, a middle class or poor household, if they're good in math, will get a degree and become a math teacher when they could have gotten a degree and become an engineer. And the financial income of a math teacher versus an engineer are
Yeah.
astronomical.
Right.
But not to say that that career isn't honorable, but
Right.
they're just looking at it from a financial standpoint of where you are at the end of the day with the same skill set as someone else who had that same skill set but took it into engineering. So
That's interesting. Do you think that comes from the way perspective or the mind, I guess the way they think? That's an interesting observation as far as an engineer and then a math teacher, because their perspective is different. There's no push. Do you think it's the mindset?
I think it's the mindset. I think it's also the ability to, if you don't broaden the horizons of our children so that they can see different things, they won't know that they exist.
Yeah.
I was fortunate as a kid in high school to go to a specialized high school in New York City.
Okay.
So I know exactly what engineering looks like. I know exactly what that looks like because I went to school for it. I understand that. But if you hadn't gone to a specialized high school where these things were offered, you might not have the knowledge or the wherewithal to say, I'm interested in that. I don't know what a mechanical engineer is. I don't know what a drafter or an architect does. Like
Hmm.
those things sound good on paper, but if you've never seen it, I
Yeah.
don't think you're not going to hang your hat of your college, your 4-year degree on that.
Right. Generational wealth, Jamal, is a term that's used a lot, that we hear a lot about. How can we set, I guess we kind of talking about a little bit, the next generation for generational wealth? And let me tell you my perspective. I feel generational wealth is not just financial. I think it's the building of the character. So
Yeah.
can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. There are some intangibles of generational wealth that we won't just see in a product that we produce or a building that we transfer to someone. It's the
Hmm.
idea of handling business as men or women, uh, you know, taking accountability,
Mhm.
you know, making sure that, we read through things and not just move by our emotions in the moment.
Yeah.
That could be something generationally that you pass down to a child, because
Yes.
they listen to what we say, but they pay attention to what they see.
Mm.
They're
Wow.
students to what they see us do,
Yeah.
not so much what we say.
Interesting. And I do have to ask this question because we're talking about generational wealth, um, things we pass down. What is your thoughts on self-sabotage?
Man, there's self-sabotage. I think it's changing your thought process. I used to always say to myself, and this is something really that I discovered in prayer, like, you really have to change how you think about things when things are going down and things are not going in my favor. I used to always be the type of person to say, well, maybe they never liked me in the beginning, or they
Mhm.
didn't want to help me in the first place. And no, it could just be that it fell flat or it didn't work out. And I had to change my logic or my thought process behind things not turning my way, to not think that people are against me.
Right, right. And that's you hit the nail on the head. That's why I wanted to ask that question because I'm actually in school, and one of the things we're doing in this part of the lesson is talking about self-sabotage. And when we were talking about generational wealth, that's what came up in me because we can sometimes stop a process that's happening out of coming from like fear or like you said belief, the way we see ourselves. And it's so important to take what we've learned and apply it, but sometimes because we lack the belief within ourselves, you know what, that self-sabotage can stop that process. So how do we take that, and what's the end game in preparing the future for our kids, for my grandkids, for your kids? How do we prepare them?
Um, we prepare them by being transparent, letting them know, hey, this is where I was when I was your age, and this is where I would have liked myself to be, and
Hmm.
how I'm making the steps now of corrective action. And even if you don't have a crazy story, because life doesn't have to be that way, but just saying to your children, my goal as a father is not just to give you what you want, but to put you in a position to be successful in all areas of your life.
Yes.
So you're going to learn the difference between your regular fork and your salad fork. It's really just about putting them in the room, making sure that they have the conversations, making sure that they have the articulation. So when they're in certain spaces, they're not they're not uncomfortable,
Right,
because that's where
right.
failure and peer pressure happens, when they haven't been exposed to it.
Mhm.
So I see it all the time when kids go to college, they haven't been exposed to credit cards. So when the bank sets up the table, and I say this because I worked for a bank, and we literally had a branch in the college, and kids could come in. You're 18, you apply, you get the
Yeah,
credit card.
yeah, that's true.
I don't have any income, but I can put mom and dad's name on that thing, because
Mhm.
they're my income, they're my bank.
Right.
So
And there's
you
the debt.
they don't have any consequences of that. But
Yeah,
if you put them on a card when they're young and say, I'm giving you this card from an emergency standpoint,
right,
or I want you to be able to spend money on my credit card and from your allowance pay for it, or
right, right.
giving them, teaching them the basics. Like I told my daughter, because she wanted a pair of sneakers,
Mhm,
and they were a very expensive pair of Jordans that she wanted. I
mhm.
said to her, from the money that I give you from your allowance, give me $10 for the tax. And she was like, but why, Daddy? I was like, because I need you to understand that you have skin in this as well. So this is your investment. Now you
Yes,
can keep the sneakers, you can sell them, you can do whatever you want, but you had to contribute. You contributed to what you got. So just teaching them these processes from a young age.
yeah. And thank you for that, Jamal, because that was a segue into kind of like the last question I was going to talk about is how do we give our children or grandchildren a jump start or a head start to success? And you just plainly put it exactly what I was thinking, that's preparation for success. being able to understand credit cards. And you said it so right. When kids go to college and they get a credit card, that right, they can't pay it back because the parent is the one that's actually, is the financial burden or the financial person that's going to be able to handle it for the children. So I want to thank you for that because we're trying to prepare our children to be successful. If there's a last minute thing you can say to somebody that's listening to what we're talking about, what would that be?
Make sure in your home that you're having real talk conversations. Understand your financial capacity, understand your emotional capacity, understand the feeling that you get when money's in your house. And is that feeling actually tied to anything that's beneficial for your family?
That's powerful. So to our viewing audience, Jamal has shared some great topics, some great food from a financial perspective, just kind of putting things very plainly. And I think that's what I liked about the conversation this evening to my audience. Things were put very plainly. It wasn't so high that no one can reach it, but yet it was high enough that it can be reached. And that's what I liked about tonight's conversation. So we want to thank you tonight, Jamal, for being such a part of Real Talk with Jean Price. Is there any way that if people wanted to get in touch with you, if my team can just put your information, or you can just say it if you like, I don't know if you have a platform where people might want to reach out and get some more advice on financial tools.
Yes, my website is thecreditcommander.com. That's for my credit repair and financial consulting business. You can also email me at info@thecreditcommander.com, where we can talk about all things credit, all things financial. And, we don't just sell you a product, but we do a consultation where we sit down with you to see exactly how we can be of service to you. And if we can't, we'll send you to someone else specifically for what you need.
Again, we want to thank Jamal Toll for being on Real Talk. His information is on the screen. Contact him. This was so good. Quincy Mays chimed in and said that this was very understandable. That's what I kept hearing. It was so plain that you made it that people can really understand what you were saying tonight. We want to thank you again for being on Real Talk. And to my viewing audience, we will see you next week at 6:30 on Real Talk with Jean Price. Have a good evening.
Thank you.